Hey there, this is Natalie, and it's time for chapter 82 of Arc 6 of ReZero. I've also just read chapter 83, and there's a lot going on in these two chapters. So without further ado, I'm going to get straight into this one. I will make the video about chapter 83 immediately after this, but it does take a bit of time to edit and render them, so apologies if there's a bit of a delay between uploading the two videos. I'm working as fast as I can, but you know, Tappei's in beast mode, so it's not that easy to keep up. Anyway, we go into chapter 82 where we've returned to the fight between Ram and Lye Batenkaitos. In this scene, we're going to see Ram basically removing the shackles that she normally has on her abilities in order to protect her body where she no longer has her horn. She can do this because Subaru is bearing the brunt of the punishment that she receives for doing that because of his Corleonis skill, and we'll later see a scene with Subaru where we'll see how much of a toll this is taking on him, as well as what's going on in his fight against Shaula with Maylie and Beatrice. Now to begin, Lye Batenkaitos is taunting Ram still, using Rem's memories. He's basically speaking as Rem, talking about how much he loves his older sister, how great she is, which is making Ram pretty angry. Ram is fighting him using her wind magic as well as her physical ability, and Lay is beginning to think that Ram would be a good person to eat. He says, "Spicy and irresistible spices, astringent and irresistible tricks. The joy explosion is just dynamic. My sister is a perfect treat for our gastronomy. Above all, the smell of anger is good. The person who hates us personally so much, what kind of gastronomy can we enjoy if we taste it on our tongue?" And Ram, facing this, begins to think about the shackles on her consciousness. Normally, when working as a servant, leave all shackles on. Sometimes it's an emergency and you have to use magic to break through the situation. In such a case, remove one shackle and allow yourself to use the minimum amount of magic. And if there's still a situation that does not fit, remove the second shackle. And although it's a short-term decisive battle, it will be in a state where Ram can demonstrate about 20% of her original performance. That is her performance as the second coming of the Oni god, which is something that will be talked about in chapter 83 some more, but it is something that was mentioned about Ram in some of the backstory stuff we've seen about the Oni village. Here it says that the last time that Ram unleashed her powers and took off her shackles was in the fight with Garfield in Sanctuary, which was about a year and a half ago from the time when this is taking place in Arc 6. She removed 2 shackles then, and of course she was only able to fight very briefly before she had to stop and take the punishment on her body that using her abilities without her shackles caused. But in this case, that doesn't happen because it's flowing into Subaru, the fake community. Now I guess this kind of tells us what that strange line in chapter 80 that I pointed out in the Google Translate about the fate community being truly horrifying. I guess it's nothing to do with Fate, the series, the franchise, but instead it's to do with the way that Subaru and Ram, through the use of Corleonis, have created a communal kind of pool of people who share the outcomes of the damage onto Ram, which is kind of how Corleonis works, but I didn't pick up on that kind of meaning of that translation in chapter 80 and just kind of found it funny. Now she thinks that if she spends too long like this, Barasu will die. According to the discussion, Subaru will be struggling to deal with the runaway Shaula and the rush of demon beasts at this time. Beatrice and Meili are probably with him, and then she thinks about Emilia, who's heading to the upper layer where she's struggling alone. But where Emilia's had her name eaten, Ram doesn't really know much about Emilia anymore. She's worried about the positive silver-haired girl, and she says that she's sure Emilia had been burned a lot before she was robbed of her name. Still, because Ram isn't able to do anything about any of those things, She just thinks that what she needs to do is defeat Ley, and she thinks, be patient with dying, Barasu, because Ram will cry. Yes, throwing inaudible words, Ram removed the third shackle for the first time in 10 years. Now the scene changes and we see the result of this from Subaru's perspective. And it says, at that moment, the reaction of Corleonis strips Natsuki Subaru's fangs. It's like blood spitting. No, it's the arrival of actual blood spitting load. For a moment, he felt one of the faint lights in the tower bloated, and immediately after that, it attacked Subaru. So that's referring to the way he sees lights representing all of his companions when he uses Corleonis, and when they become emotionally affected in any way, the lights get brighter or dimmer. And in this case, I guess as Ram decided to do that, the light representing her got brighter for Subaru, and immediately afterwards he felt the physical effects of Ram removing that third shackle. Beatrice feels Subaru cough blood and feel like he's about to collapse. They're still both sitting on the back of the Hungry Horse King, the strange centaur monster, who does not expect to carry creatures. Subaru only has experience in riding on the ground dragons, and where there isn't a saddle or any stirrups on the back of the beast, they're kind of strapping themselves on using Beatrice's magic and the whip that Subaru usually carries, which he's got wrapped around the body of the demon beast. Beatrice suggests that Ram's reaction has probably come, and Subaru says, as you might expect, it's bad, but I can bear it somehow. Regripping the whip, Subaru responds to the well-understood Beatrice. The vomiting sensation that comes up has the taste and smell of iron rust, and he has no idea where the load on his body is that's causing the pain. Is it some kind of damage that the internal organs screamed, something in his body broke, or something like that? In any case, it's proof that Ram has become serious. But he's thinking that if Ram can clean up one half of gluttony, because there's still also the rest of gluttony, even when she's dealt with Ley, he's saying it won't necessarily ease the situation all at once. He's not sure if it means the return of the names and memories of the people who had them stolen, but it will definitely reduce the burden on Subaru. It would also mean that Ram would be able to head to the green room in the tower and heal herself, and it would basically create a much better situation for the entire party if Ram can end this fight. And so Subaru's willing to take on whatever he can take on Ram's behalf so that she can fight at her best. Now they turn their attention to what Maylie is doing, and Maylie's using all kinds of different demon beasts in order to fight against Shaula. She's using these, what's called an oiram bear here. These are the courtesan bears, I think they were called in the translation, the bears with the flowers all over them. She's got the giant earthworms later on in this chapter. She's basically using whatever she can find on the battlefield, and she's kind of, it says later on, kind of exchanging the lives of the demon beasts that she's kind of hurling at Shaula in return for making progress in this battle. Subaru then begins to sort of zone out and think about the difference between divine protections and authorities, thinking about the abilities that Maylie and Otto have, which are not so much magical powers but supernatural powers that enable them to extend human abilities in order to communicate with, in Maylie's case, demon beasts, and in Otto's, regular animals. Subaru, on the other hand, of course, has authorities. He says, because blessing and authority are part of an incomprehensible system, authorities which belong to the Sin Archbishops, witches, and Subaru for some reason, or the blessing that will be bestowed on something born in this world. And he begins to think about how many people would not have been able to distort their destiny without such a blessing, but that Maylie was probably a victim of the negative side of that. He thinks that she may have been abandoned by her real parents because she was born with the power to talk to demons. He doesn't know if that's the case, however it's a convincing theory. Remember that in previous loops he has seen Maylie's Book of the Dead, but it didn't really show how she ended up being surrounded by demon beasts as a child to begin with, I guess because she was too young to really remember that. Subaru says he doesn't want to rely on an authority or a blessing, but he doesn't hesitate to use it if necessary. It's true that weak people have limited choices. I'm forcing a road that isn't a road, and I don't want to forget that and be able to laugh. And while he's kind of gibbering on about this, Maylie tells him, "Brother, I'm concentrating. If my brother and Beatrice are killed, that's all there is to it." And then he says, "I know. Hey Maylie, when all this is done, why don't you become my child?" I think this is kind of a strange thing in the translation. I don't think this is Subaru saying he wants to adopt Maylie and become her father. I think it's more like because the word child is used quite a lot in these translations, these automatic ones, to talk about the kind of the familial relationship of the group, such as in the last chapter when Emilia was saying there were a lot of children like Subaru and Ram who cared about her. So I think in this case it's more that he's asking her to sort of officially join Emilia's faction, though I could be wrong there. Maybe he really does want to adopt her, have a cute little sister for Beatrice, I don't know. But it's just my feeling that it's more a kind of he's asking her to join them and become part of their unit. But she sort of says, concentrate. She doesn't really want her concentration taken away to listen to Subaru's ideas about the future. So she yells back at Subaru, "If you lose your concentration, you may be taken in an instant." And Subaru thinks he's having so much pain, so if I don't think that a good tomorrow is waiting, it won't pay. That's, he's trying to look to a future where they're all gonna be together, doing stuff together, to kind of make it seem worth the suffering that he's going through, handling all of Ram's punishments for what she needs to do in order to win her fight. But now the point of view shifts. It's the same scene, but it's shifting from Subaru to Maylie. And Maylie is thinking about what Subaru's just said a lot more than she's letting on. Maylie mutters to herself something's wrong, and she begins to think about all of the things that kind of are wrong at the moment. There's Shaula, who's turned into a giant scorpion. There's Emilia, who nobody remembers. There's Ram and Julius, who are fighting various enemies in the watchtower. But that's not what Maylie is thinking is wrong. Maylie is thinking, what am I? She thinks about the reasons why she joined in with Subaru when he asked for her to come along on this journey. And she thinks about the decision that she made to go and look for Elsa's Book of the Dead, which is what then led to her trying to kill Subaru, and Subaru getting her to agree to behave herself, basically, and to be someone that he can rely on while they're in this tower. Somehow I was made to promise the cooperation after that. She thinks about how she's leading all of these creatures to their deaths. Originally, a timid Hadoryu cannot attack an enemy stronger than himself, but even Maylie, who can give an order to jump over the instinct, cannot strengthen the demon beast. And the demon beast is killed. It says, swinging a huge pair of scissors, the violence of a raging scorpion kills demons one after another. By scissors, I guess it means the pincers of a scorpion. The blood of the demon beast that was torn, crushed and pierced was soaked in the thirsty sand, and the sandy sea that looked yellow was turning into a red-black thing. While biting into that fact, Maylie quickly looks around, looking for signs of demons in the sky or the sand, or even under the sand, and tame from things that can be tamed. She doesn't care about quality. It was a time when she needs an exhaustible amount of handpieces. Just like for Subaru, it's not comfortable for Maylie riding on the back of the Hungry Horse King, but unlike Subaru, she is riding it because she's got a knife thrust against the back of the demon beast through her cloak, forcibly fixing her body to the creature. Because the demon beast is under her control, she can accept this kind of violence, she says. The problem was that Maylie was in this situation more than the demon beast. In the first place, such a last-minute battle is not the original way of Maylie, And then it goes on to talk about how Maylie's usual way of assassinating people or fighting is to prepare in advance and, recruit the right demon beasts, have them in the right positions, and to wage war basically in that way, which we saw her do at the mansion in Arc 4 and with her attack on the village in Arc 2. Then it says, because of the wrong choice, Maylie lost the battle with Subaru and became his prisoner. And then she starts to think about Elsa and how she died because of the accumulation of such missteps. Of course, Elsa wouldn't want Maylie to blame herself at all. And then she thinks that just as she doesn't understand Elsa's feelings, she also doesn't understand her own feelings. She's playing a delayed battle against a large scorpion, devoting herself to earning time in exchange for the life of a demon beast. And Maylie has never done this before. Her main business was to take someone's life by order, instruction and request, and this is the first time she's had to fight to save someone's life and protect it. And this is causing some conflict in Maylie. This isn't my way, she says. The one word that Subaru said earlier was asexually annoying. That's kind of a weird way of saying it. I think she's referring to him asking if she would be his child, if she would join their group. But she still has some resentment towards Subaru for assembling the situation, even though it was Garfield that actually killed Elsa. She says no matter how you look at it, Subaru doesn't have such a vessel. All that Subaru has is desperation, intrusive expectations, and crazy trust that entrusts you with your own life. And she says, somehow I feel like I'm a fool. And this is a lot of introspection from Maylie, as we can really see her struggling with perhaps wanting to be a better person, wanting to ally with Subaru after all of this, but still being kind of confused because of the way she was raised, because of her history as a hitman, because of her bond with Elsa. But before we get to really dig any deeper into that, shit starts to get fucky. We see that the sandworm that she's been controlling is killed in an instant by the scorpion that Shaula has turned into, and next she tries to find some more creatures, and 3 hungry horse kings emerge from the basement where the sandworm had popped out of. She thinks that, these hungry horse kings are going to be useful in the battle. Although it's inferior to the Emperor's Scorpion in combat power, it's this demon beast that the opponent is most wary of. It's proof that the firepower of the demon beast is a threat. So she's got 3 of these, and she says, I feel like I'm in good shape. She doesn't want to kill the demon beasts, but she says, however, if you hurt even a little, it will be easier to achieve Subaru's purpose. And then we hear that, in a sense, it may have been the 3rd time that a girl named Maylie, who had been swept away, wanted to do something on her own initiative. The first was the time she went out in search of salvation in the Book of the Dead. The second was the time she attempted to kill Subaru by pushing him off the spiral staircase. And the 3rd time, in order to fulfill the purpose of earning time, she sought more results than desired. But the next thing she hears is Subaru screaming out her name. It was literally Subaru's cry bleeding from the edge of his mouth. Maylie wonders if it's Kaya, I don't know what that means, joy or wonder. But she doesn't really have time to think much about this. The 3 hungry horse kings hold a spear of fire to rush to the large scorpion. No matter how well you handle the pincers and the tail needle, you can't prevent it. It collapses when you see the changes that have occurred in the body of the Emperor Scorpion. It was as if it had been burned in flames or sucked blood like sand. The outer shell, which was dull and shining like dark steel, discolours as if awake. One beat, the next moment, the colour of the jet black crustacean changed to a bloody red. Some kind of demon beasts cause a colour change called attack colour. It's a change that clearly changes the type of action and becomes more ferocious and aggressive. We have seen this kind of thing happen before with the various witch beasts that we've seen, like when those holes open up on the white whale before it starts, increasing its attack. The fact that the scorpion has turned bloody red also seems to confirm that Shaula is the red scorpion that Tape mentioned in a tweet as being a demon beast created by Daphne. There wasn't really a lot of doubt about that, but we'd never seen Shaula turn red before, though we have seen her turn into a scorpion. But it seems that she's definitely the creature that he was referring to in that tweet. So somehow Shaula was created by Daphne, along with the 3 great witch beasts and the coffin that Daphne lives in. But what's important here is the attack power of Shaula when she's in this form. More aggressive, more destructive, more annihilated. White light is emitted in all directions, and the 3 hungry horse kings who jumped on it disappear. At the same time, the aftermath of the turbulent white light, raging the sandy sea as if it were slaughtered, and swallowed by the torrent of exploding light, Maylie's small body flew in the air with blood droplets. Now, I would be really interested to hear what you guys think about this moment. It has felt for quite a long time like this was going to be the climactic loop of Arc 6 and that we wouldn't be getting another return by death, but it does seem like Maylie probably died here. Do you think that's going to be a permanent death? Do you think she's actually not dead? Or do you think maybe there is going to be a surprise return by death coming up before the end of the arc? Things aren't really going well for Subaru's party in general. But I do think that Maylie, to me, seems like, of all the people in the party for Arc 6, she's probably the one whose death would be most likely from a permanent death point of view. It's not going to be something Subaru would normally be willing to accept. He's become pretty sympathetic towards Maylie over the course of this arc. He clearly does want Maylie to join with them in their positive future, but there could be various reasons why Subaru may not be able to do anything about this if Maylie actually is dead. There's a chance she didn't die here. There's a chance they might be able to get her to the green room, or Beatrice may be able to sufficiently heal her. But yeah, I don't know if this is the end for Maylie. And so I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think. We won't be seeing any more from this scene in this chapter or in chapter 83 though. Everything else is going to go back to the Ram and Lye Batenkaitos fight, which is going to get pretty intense. So for today at least, we're not going to find out what happened to Maylie here, or what happens next with Shaula now in her red scorpion form, fighting against, now if Maylie is out of action, just Subaru and Beatrice. But before we even really have time to kind of digest that, we go straight back into the action with Ram. Now as we return to Ram's point of view, she's thinking about herself. She says, "I hated the feeling of boiling blood and the feeling of excitement that overflowed from an early age." This is a reference to something that's going to be explored a bit more in chapter 83, which is the sensation that Ram used to get when she still had her horn of, the power of the demon god basically encouraging her to act like an Oni, to be violent and to assert her dominance and strength. But Ram thinks, "I have good awareness, but I'm not overconfident in it. I also make mistakes. I just have the intention to make no mistakes and the attitude to correct mistakes. I was able to hold such an attitude because I didn't get drunk with the feeling of omnipotence. Thanks to the fact I didn't misunderstand myself as wonderful," as she heard people whispering around her, and she didn't have to be compliant with things that respect old-fashioned conventions and old-fashioned mysteries. And what was the reason why I wasn't crushed by such external factions? I knew it was probably due to something missing that I couldn't remember. And so she's really thinking that the reason why she didn't succumb to kind of egotism and the sense that she was as overpowered as she actually was with her horn was probably because of Ram, something missing that she couldn't remember. And she says Ram is not only cute but also intelligent. And as she's thinking about this, she's also launching more attacks on Lye Batenkaitos. There is generally just an action scene between the two of them where they're fighting each other with wind magic, and Ley uses some kind of skill to do a kind of aerial walk. He sets kind of traps in the air using some kind of wind magic, creating a scaffolding. It's not that easy to follow with Google Translate, I have to say. It's probably going to be something that's going to look really cool eventually in the anime, though. He's basically sort of up in the air, but Ram has her power of clairvoyance that we haven't really seen referenced much in this arc, but it's something that she did use in arcs 2, 3 and 4, or 2 and 4. And so we know that that's established as something that Ram can do. Even if it cannot be perceived as a perception, if it can be overlapped with the human field of vision that's been set up, the whereabouts can be known by a small change in consciousness. Astonished, Batenkaitos jumps into the air faster than it rises, and Ram sees his disgusting face under his eyes. Then he, and I think here it's actually referring to Ram instead of he, it should be she, mercilessly slammed the sole of her foot into his open-mouthed face with sharp fangs. How many times do you taste the souls of Ram until you fall down? The nose is crushed and the dwarf Batenkaitos flips in the air. Gluttony was shot down directly below by the power of Ram's kicks. Following that, Ram raises a hand to the heavens, creates a breeze from her palm, plunges and hits the face of Batenkaitos, who falls with a second kick, a third and a fourth kick. Relentlessly, the nose, front teeth, chin and forehead are kicked by Ram's heel with each shot. It was unpleasant to see the grin and the mouth that repeatedly called Ram sister. If you hit the trap you set up, it's not Ram's fault, you're on your own. On the way to being kicked down, an invisible blade set in the hollow tears Batenkaitos' body. This is referring to how he himself set up kind of wind traps in the area where they're fighting, and where Ram's kind of kicking him from up in the air downwards, he's colliding with these traps and it's injuring him. It says there's a deep squirt of blood and some flesh, but Ram doesn't care about it. Ram doesn't have a hobby to bother and to hurt her opponent. But that's also the case when the other person has something to sympathise with, and if the other person hates her, she doesn't hesitate to make him scream like a pig. This is the third time we've had Ram wanting someone to scream like a pig in the last few chapters. And now Ram repeatedly asks Batenkaitos if he regrets it. She says this 3 times. She's talking about whether he regrets eating Rem. And it says a large number of victims other than Rem who've been victims of eating so far. This is to regain the things that have been deprived of their name and memory and have been deprived of their history. And Ram is thinking that she could actually kill him. With the same effort as kicking and crushing your face, you can wear a wind blade on the sole of your foot and squeeze your neck. It's been proven that even witches, who are famous for their filthiness, die when their necks and torso are separated. Now from the next part, which says, in the process of responding to the things that destroyed the village in the burning demon village, after all, I know that it's a group of weak and stupid things, such as witches, whose sexual roots are horrifying. See, she's talking here about potentially decapitating Batenkaitos with a wind blade on the sole of her foot and squeezing his neck. It's been proven that witches die when their necks and torso are separated. And then she talks about, very briefly, the Oni village, which burned down when she was a child, which again is something that will be revisited in chapter 83. But I'm not sure if this translation, where it says witches, it may actually be thinking about witch cultists, because it does seem that the witch cult was responsible for burning down the village, rather than any actual witches. There shouldn't have been any witches still alive, other than potentially Pandora, who may well have been at the Oni village event. That's a possibility, but she certainly probably wasn't decapitated there to the point of actually dying. So if somebody was killed in that way, that's what Ram's thinking about here, then it's more likely that it was witch cultists rather than actual witches. Also says whose sexual roots are horrifying. I don't know if that's just a weird translation of something along the lines of saying they're deviants or something like that. But now, when Ram again asks him if he regrets it, he shouts solar eclipse, and then he disappears in the blink of an eye in front of Ram. It was not the disappearance of the dimension of moving at high speed. The feeling of the body on the face of the other person who stepped on from the sole of the shoe disappears, but where Batenkaitos disappeared was immediately struck. So he's just literally vanished in a blink rather than moving away from Ram's foot very quickly. She uses clairvoyance again. No one can escape from Ram as long as they keep their sights in check, follow the visible field of view and locate the spiral staircase where the opponent is. And so she's able to basically see what Batenkaitos is seeing, and then she catches up. She sees an old man with a bald head wearing something like a monk's robe. Ram, because she's using her clairvoyance, isn't confused by his change in appearance, no matter what the opponent looks like. She says, I've heard that ghosting is a technique of lust, but what other tricks are there? By ghosting, I think it's a bad translation of something along the lines of transformation, and she's referring to the techniques of the Sin Archbishop of Lust, Capella, who can shapeshift basically, and this is what Batenkaitos has just appeared to do in front of Ram. But Batenkaitos' response here is weird. He sort of says, I didn't mean to use it. No, I shouldn't have. And Ram finds the old man who kneels there, who she thinks is Batenkaitos, moaning painfully. From what I've seen in the summary on Reddit, people are thinking that this is a way of speaking that's more akin to how Louis speaks, Louis Arneb, the other Gluttony's sister. The change in dialogue is likely that Louis Arneb has used solar eclipse to jump into her brother for a moment. It does get discussed about the difference between lunar and solar eclipse in the next chapter, and I think that that is most likely what's happened here, which is why just for a moment Batenkaitos is no longer quite as aggressive and is a bit more upset. Ram thinks about how she doesn't have much longer in this state because of the burden that she's placing on Subaru. So she asks the bald man, who she believes is Lye Batenkaitos, do you feel like swallowing this request? Bring back everything you've eaten as a glutton so far. And the reply is, then what? Even if we miss the souls? Which again does seem more like something that Louis Arneb would say rather than Lye Batenkaitos. But Ram's response anyway is, no, then I'll kill you right away. It's a good deal. I'll forgive you for what you deserve. But now it seems that Batenkaitos turns back into himself. It says Batenkaitos, who has aged the first person, leaks the same old laughter. While observing this behaviour, Ram speculates that the transformation of his appearance was perhaps the process necessary to make full use of the person's ability. Earlier, when he completely disappeared in front of Ram, was a technique called sprinting in place. It was probably something the old man with the bald head can do that Batenkaitos can use, because he must have eaten whoever that guy was. But she says, but it's strange, if you have such a trump card, you know, she's basically surprised why he didn't use it earlier. Why was he lying down? Why was he kind of going lighter earlier in the fight? She thinks about how there could be a reason why he didn't want to use it. And he says, no, I've never really come across such a scary girl. I'm really scared of my sister. And as Batenkaitos has turned back into himself, she sees that his transformation did not lose the wounds. Batenkaitos is bloody and has a terrible face. It seems that his shoulders, which I guess Ram had dislocated in the fight, have now moved back into place because he hit it against the wall and it fits in, but he says it hurts. And then Ram kind of regrets that she didn't cut his arm off at the shoulder instead of just injuring it. And now Batenkaitos kind of says, again referring to Ram as his sister, using that kind of Rem-like way of talking, everything I do, this and that is all ahead of me. Amazing, my sister. Maybe my sister is using the authority like an older brother. And Ram just says no, Ram's just this great at insight. And then she says something like weird that I think must be either a translation error or a reference to something that I don't get, which is don't go with the intuition that Bath doesn't understand. It's unpleasant. Die. It almost sounds like something Garfield would say. Don't go with the intuition that Bath doesn't understand. It's like one of Garfield's weird idioms, but it's just Google Translate probably. It says Batenkaitos has a blood-stained smile with his tongue hanging loosely from his broken mouth. The eerie gesture is eye-opening and Ram's shoulders are stressed. So Ram chooses to blow off her opponent's limbs with a wind blade before any strange moves come in. There is a way to stop blood, there is no way to stop the pain, but if he doesn't die, the cross-examination will continue. Judging that, she stuck a wind blade without any adjustment, but then Batenkaitos says the bet is our win. And now he's transformed again. A plump, beard-faced man flew backwards, bathing in the blade of the wind. No matter how thick the skin is, the blade of the wind, which should be able to cut off even a thick torso rather than the limbs, is repelled with only redness on the fat man's skin. And he says, "Sister, you might have misunderstood. I tell you, you're not the only one observing the other person, right?" In order not to let the giant escape, Ram is called to move forward. The appearance of the old man disappeared at the speed of blinking, and the intimidating feeling of the sign that appeared behind increased. No time to turn around. A strong fist is driven into Ram's flank, and her slenderness blows away. If you were to look at it while being blown away, the one who hit Ram was a man with a strong physique and a rough atmosphere, a link that instantly switches the appearance of the three people and fully applies their characteristics. So it seems that Batenkaitos is just switching around to different people's bodies that he's eaten so that he can use all of their physical abilities. The barking Batenkaitos turns into an old man again, and his hand closes one of his eyes. Frightened by the movement, Ram stretches out her long legs, kicks the wall at once, and tries to position herself to quickly jump at her opponent, but not in time. We know Rem's sister can't keep moving that way without some tricks. Rem's knowledge, not Ram's move, drew the answer. Now, what's happening here is Batenkaitos has confirmed, using Rem's knowledge, that Ram is moving beyond the limits of what she should be able to do without taking off her shackles, and so he knows that she's using some method or other to be able to achieve this, and that she's probably got some limitations. In this case, she actually does have the limitation of she doesn't know how long Subaru will be able to withstand what she is inflicting on him by doing this. Batenkaitos confirms his guess, and when Ram turns to the steps of the stairs, he completes his malice. And so he says, "Sister, we don't want to compare our strengths with our sister." And the old man smiles and disappears into space. Teleportation due to short distance spatial distortion. If you continue it, you can easily leave the battlefield. But Ram realizes that if you know about Ram's clairvoyance, you probably don't think you can escape. Knowing that, she realizes that he's just trying to open up the distance because he's realized that Ram has a kind of time limit on how long she'll be able to fight this strongly for. And by doing this, Ram has been deprived of time. The burden on Subaru increases every second, so she needs to know the whereabouts of Batenkaitos as soon as possible. And so she thinks about it and notices it. The Deadly Sins Bishop, who is a mass of malice, has to enter the tower just to escape. He knows how to get the most out of the opposing Ram. That is Rem. And Rem uses her clairvoyance again to see what Batenkaitos is now seeing. Finally, the evil view that was captured again is shared with Ram's view. The tail of a black earth dragon running with a sleeping princess was reflected there. So Batenkaitos is chasing after Patrasche, who is carrying Rem. And that's the end of this chapter. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this chapter. Like I said, you don't even really have time to kind of think about what's going on in the scene with Subaru and Maylie, whether Maylie was actually killed there, Shaula having this red scorpion form, because immediately we're into this fight with Ram and Lye Batenkaitos, and at the end there We see Batenkaitos using these strange eclipse abilities, turning into other people, possibly having Luiar Neb take over his body briefly, and then teleporting away to lure Ram because he's figured out that she's on a time limit for being able to use her unshackled abilities, and trying to drag her away by chasing after Patrasche, who's trying to save Rem from him. Yeah, so there's so much going on. I will, once I've edited this one, make chapter 83 straight away, which carries on from exactly this point. We get to see just what happens next with Rem and Ram. And so I hope to have that with you in the next couple of hours by the time I've had to do the editing and rendering. But yeah, I hope you'll join me for that one. Thank you so much for listening to this one, and I'll see you again very soon.